my friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Katey Flowers, and can you believe it's already the end of November? And it is time for another favourites video. So I've actually been pretty busy this month, primarily with settling into my new job and also just getting back into the swing of things now that we're out of lockdown and reopening up here in Melbourne. So some things I did not do as much of this month, such as watching YouTube, but I still got plenty of reading in, and I actually have a lot of decks to share with you this month that I really enjoyed using. And as per usual, we will start with the books. So as always, I will be doing a reading wrap up over on my second channel. So if you're into books and you want to hear about all of the books that I read this month, and I have read quite a few, the link to my second channel will be in the description box below. But for this video, being our favorites video, I've picked out my top 2 favorite books of the month. So we'll start with my favorite non-fiction of the month, and that is Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. This was the Blossom Book Club book for the month of October. I sort of read it at the end of October and finished it at the beginning of November, so that's why I'm including it in this month's reading. I actually decided not to rate this on GoodReads because I felt like it was one of those books that just defies a rating scale. There was a lot about it that I didn't love, or that I disagreed with, or that just felt a bit clunky or unfinished to me. So it didn't warrant 5 stars. And yet, the way this book got me thinking outside of my box and asking myself some really big questions that I'd never even considered before, it was brilliant. The experience of reading this book was brilliant. And this book is many things, but essentially my takeaway from it was that Tyson is sort of analysing or asking questions of Western civilization and Western culture from an Aboriginal lens. And the title Sand Talk refers to an Aboriginal custom of drawing images and symbols into the ground, into the sand, to help provide clarity to a conversation. And he utilises this custom throughout the book, and there are images and symbols that he has come up with to represent some of the concepts that he tries to break down in this book. He also incorporates yarns, which is a colloquial Australian word for just like having a conversation, but his use of yarns is a bit more specific, and it's a discussion with another person that he both respects but often disagrees with, to sort of break down even further some ideas and to explore his own thoughts around ideas and to encourage us to consider multiple points of view. He explores a lot of different principles and concepts and ideas and customs and practices that are integral to many Aboriginal cultures and Indigenous cultures that have to do with sustainability and sustainable living and sustainable community. For me, this book definitely asked more questions than it answered, and I think that's kind of the point. It challenged me a lot as a reader and as a person and as a white person, and I think it was just done very effectively. Culture is to us like water is to a fish. I know that's a very common sort of analogy that is made, and this book for me, I think, helped me become a little bit more aware of that water that I'm swimming in, and to ask questions of it, and to challenge the assumption that it is just factual or the way things are or always have been. The sort of very, very deep, low level assumed biases that we're all just indoctrinated into from birth, you know? I don't know. I just think this was a very powerful book, and a book very, very well done. And also I think quite a brave book. I think it tackled a lot of really tricky subjects, and it dared to go there. One example, and a chapter that I really loved, I found it very challenging and very compelling and very interesting, was a chapter on violence. So yeah, even though there's elements of this book that I did not like or did not agree with, I loved the experience of reading it, and I think it's a wonderful one, and definitely encourage anybody else to read it as well. And then my fiction pick of the month is The Boy from the Mish by Lonesborough. This is such a beautiful YA novel. It's a coming of age or just self-discovery novel, primarily centering Jackson, who is a 17-year-old Aboriginal boy living in a rural community, a small town. He lives on the Mish, which is an Aboriginal community sort of on the outskirts of a largely white town. And the story takes place over just a couple of weeks over the summer, over Christmas, when Thomas comes to stay with Jackson's family. And it's essentially a story about friendship, about community, about identity, about masculinity, about self-discovery, and ultimately it's also a love story between these two boys. They sort of discover themselves and each other through this novel, and it's just so beautifully done. I don't know, it all just felt so raw and authentic and honest, and I especially loved some of the conversations that came up in the book between Jackson and his friends, or between his friends, or between elders in his community, around identity, around masculinity, around queerness, and how all of these things kind of interplay with an Aboriginal identity. It was so beautifully done. And I finished it on the tram and I could not help but cry. I was crying on the tram. Honestly, something I do more regularly than I'd like to admit. Gary, the author, is a Yuin man, and he talks about in the back of the book that this is essentially the book that he kind of wishes he had when he was growing up. That he didn't have access to any YA queer Aboriginal stories, and yeah, so he wrote it himself and he gave us such a gift. It's such a gorgeous book. Obviously, the representation and the conversation that this book brings up are just brilliant and so important. But on top of that, just the characterization, especially of Jackson and of Thomas. I don't know, all of the characters just came to life. They felt so real, they felt so authentic, and they just popped off the page almost immediately. So you're so invested in these two boys and their story, and it was wonderful. Now let's talk about all of the decks that I loved using this month. So I actually recently did a video on these mini decks that I got on my last day at the TS. I have not stopped using these two in particular, the Forest Fae and the Secret Garden. And it's funny because the Whispering Woods, the third deck that I shared in that video, was the one that I was at first drawn to, and yet it's the one that I haven't been drawn to use at all this month. It's these two that I have not been able to put down. Every couple of days, every 2 to 3 days, I've been pulling a card from one of these decks and then using it as a bookmark and sort of just, I don't know, having the affirmation or the keyword or the message just like really at the forefront of my experience, my day-to-day experience, because obviously I'm a big reader, so I'm always opening my books. And just being reminded for that brief moment when I see the bookmark, when I open my book, of the, I don't know, the keystone, the center point, the thing that I'm returning to, that I'm trying to focus on for that day or that couple of days, it's been really, really helpful and a really positive experience. The Forest Fae has been the more like synchronistic experience of the two. Usually when I pull a card from this deck, I find that, you know, part of the message or a word in the message or something about the card or the message like comes up in my life. Like I start noticing it all around me. Like whether it's the conversations that I'm having, advice people are giving me, or just things that I'm noticing and seeing. Like there's that synchronistic element to my experience with this deck, which is just really fun and really cool. The Secret Garden has been less of that, but it's also just been very grounding and sweet and gentle, like guiding advice. It has always felt like the message has been relevant to my experience on what's going on in my day-to-day life. And it's just been really good for, I don't know, a bit of added mindfulness to my day. And it's funny because I sort of like put off getting any of these mini rock pool decks for so long because I didn't really think that they would like fit into my life or that I'd use them. And yet these have quickly become like my most used, certainly of the last month anyway. I'm having such a good time. I love them both. Now for the tarot decks. The tarot deck I've probably spent the most time with this month is the Gentle Tarot. This is the deck that I'm sort of nearing the end of my latest tarot and practice video with. I am feeling quite conflicted about this deck overall, just in terms of my own personal connection to it. But it is beautiful and I've had a few very moving moments with it. I won't say too much about this deck because obviously a whole video, which is probably going to be very lengthy, is coming soon. But I really, really love the artwork. I really like the guidebook too. And although I didn't connect with all of the cards, so some of my readings felt a little stunted, a lot of the cards when they come up, like they've just outright made me cry. Like I've just gotten emotional. So in some ways this is kind of like my favorite and my least favorite experience using a deck this month, but I felt like I had to include it because I have had some very, very special moments with it. And also to let you know that that video is coming soon, I promise. Then a deck I've been talking about quite a bit lately, it feels like, is the Children of Litha. After I finished my last tarot and practice, I couldn't quite put this deck away. So I have done a couple more readings with it because I'm enjoying it so much. And I think you could tell from that tarot and practice that I just sort of flowed with this deck. Straight away, it just felt like it was speaking to me. Like obviously I know the meanings of tarot cards. I can read pretty much any deck most of the time, but I love that feeling of like almost forgetting the traditional meanings and just having an experience with the cards that are in front of you and feeling like they sing or speak to you. That is representative of the sort of experiences that I've had with this deck, and that's why I keep going back to it. It's such a good time for me. It's such a beautiful deck. I love the artwork and something about it just makes sense to me. And when I lay the cards out, the readings flow. And speaking of the Children of Litha, I did post on my community tab the person who won the black edition of the Children of Litha. And that was Maria Luisa Wessels. I have not heard from you yet though, so please contact me via my email, which is in the description box below. If I haven't heard from you by the 10th of December, I will have to redraw and give someone else the opportunity to win the deck. So please, please contact me. I want to send it to you. And then another deck I feel like I've been speaking about quite a bit lately is the Chrysalis Tarot. I'm obsessed with this deck. So obviously this this is a deck that I've known about for years, and I was attracted to it, and I have from time to time considered purchasing it, but it was only recently that I actually finally did. And similar to my experience with the Children of Litha, with the Chrysalis Tarot, I draw the cards and things just flow. The cards are absolutely beautiful. I think they're more beautiful in person than I remember them sort of being online when I was at least originally looking at this deck. The colors of the deck are like that beautiful sort of midway point between muted and earthy and vibrant and colorful. It's just stunning. There's a lot of details in these cards and in the artwork, which provides plenty of opportunity to interact with intuitively, but the cards never feel so busy or messy that like I can't make out what's going on or that I get overwhelmed or confused. It is quite a unique deck with a lot of changes made to both the card titles and also what's depicted in the cards and the meanings. But in a way, I've kind of found that liberating because it sort of forces you to drop your reliance on the Rider-Waite-Smith meanings and just to like lean into what is depicted in each card and what's intended. So like I said, quite a lot of decks that I've been playing around with this month, but I've been enjoying them all in different ways. Now for the YouTube videos I loved and want to recommend to you this month. Firstly, there were so many responses to my only 10 decks tag. I cannot believe it. I did about a week ago go through and try to watch any that I'd missed, but I know that there's even more since then. I haven't done a whole lot of tags that I have started. I know this was a borrowed one from the Buddha community, but you know what I mean. So I was not expecting so many people to respond, but it was so much fun going through and watching a lot of them. I have not seen all of them, but a lot of them. And I know that a lot of you are also posting on Instagram your answers as well. I'm not really on Instagram, but the few times I've like had to check over there, I've had a lot of notifications for people posting over there. So thank you so much to the response to that. And if you like those sort of videos, if you love people sort of breaking down what their 10 favorite special decks that they go to and that they don't want to live without, essentially, I will leave a link to the tag where you can find all of the videos that are tagged with that in the description box below. It's some good viewing. It'll keep you busy for a while. And it was great because I found some channels that I hadn't heard of before. So thank you to everybody who's responded to that so far. Next is a video called How and Why I Read Reversals by Auntie K. And I wanted to recommend this to you because it's a great video, but also because I did a video myself this month on reversals, and I sort of tried to explore some of the reasons why people do read reversals and how they read reversals. But me being someone who does not read reversals, I think it's good to point you in the direction of someone who does. And it's a great video. It's very thorough. And one of the things that I loved about it was that Auntie K gave some specific and explicit examples of like how they actually read reversals. Like they pulled out cards and did little mini readings and explained how they might interpret that reverse card in that reading. Some of the other things that I loved about that video was the encouragement to focus on what you actually see in the cards. It was a great reminder that reversals don't have to be about, you know, memorizing a second meaning for each and every card. Instead, it's about using what you already know about the card as well as your other tarot skills to interpret the meaning. So even though I'm someone who doesn't read reversals, doesn't want to read reversals, is happy not reading reversals, I still found this video both interesting and informative. It was wonderful. Now, the next video I want to recommend to you is a lengthy one. So if you're going to watch it, make sure you grab yourself a cuppa before you do. And that is Lisa Pepez's Guide to Cardstock. This was such a thorough review, and it's clear so much time and research went into this, as well as a wealth of very generous contributions from other people in the community to allow Lisa to put together such a thorough and informative video. In it, Lisa explores and discusses the different kinds of cardstock, different kinds of weight, different terminology around those things, like GSM and cores, the different kinds of cores, the different kinds of laminates, as well as things like gilding, foiling, and stamping. They talk about the terminology and what things actually mean, and also what I think is great is actually provided some examples to help us get a better sense of what these things actually are in practice, as well as starting to discuss a little bit about how all of these things impact the usability and durability of our decks. And it's just an incredible resource for the tarot community, whether you're a deck creator, a reviewer, or someone who's just interested in cardstock. But I think that about wraps up the month of November, at least for me and my favorites. As always, I would love to hear in the comments below some of the decks, books, videos that you really enjoyed this month. Of course, I have to say a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for their support of me and my channel, and an especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, Laurie, and Ian Yitzhak for their very generous support. And of course, thank you for watching. I will talk to you in the comments and in the next video. Until then, so much love. Bye.